Yeah, maybe let's pick up on that term panel, yeah, because that's was for me one of the key things to get into that at all, because like what I've done in the last few years in my artwork was specifically a series of projects that engage almost like a history of exhibitions, yeah, and sort of the exhibition as a sort of form of communication, yeah, that is profoundly modern and sort of was like developed, I would say, like mostly sort of, or not so much developed, but experienced an incredible boom in the 1950s, yeah, and boom in terms of sort of widespread proliferation of all kinds of exhibits through sort of government channels, through corporate channels, through art channels, and at the same time also proliferation through an industrialization of the exhibition as a communication structure. Yeah. And the one thing I was looking into specifically and I've worked a lot about was one of the first modular exhibits systems, yeah, that's all based on panels, yeah, and sort of panels that you just hang into a space grid structure, yeah, and in terms of that thinking about exhibitions of like the panel as what contains like a big aspect of the content of an exhibition, the panel becomes like this object also, but also this term, yeah, that is at the heart of a communication endeavor, yeah, and then of course, like with the Aspen conference, yeah, what was specifically interesting in that was, I mean, like on one level, of course, it's the same term, like the panel as a speaking format, and as you have it in the exhibition. But on the other hand, something like I would say breakdown, yeah, of communication, yeah, where suddenly that form of like one person speaking to another does not function anymore. Yeah, it sort of turns from an emancipatory gesture, yeah, as giving information for the better good of society, to a controlling gesture. Yeah, and there was a very similar sort of tendency that I had investigated before in these exhibit systems, yeah, where through their complete proliferation they got so rigid that ultimately they looked like sort of spatial prisons, where you get like measured not so much as a viewer but as a consumer of information, yeah. And so I was very interested in that, reading that almost like in the same history in a way, yeah. And I mean that for the panel specifically, but then another thing that throughout the works and the projects I've been doing in the last, like, I don't know, 10 years or so, I was always very interested in these historical moments, specifically I would say at the fringes of modernity, yeah, when sort of modernity collapses, yeah, and something else sort of emerges, yeah, and where, like in that way, a certain form of speaking cannot be upheld anymore, yeah, and something else comes out of it, yeah. It's like with the exhibition, like you have like the highest hope and the biggest despair, yeah, sort of in the same object, in the same moment, in a way, yeah. And there were like a number of other projects that I'd done, like for example on sort of the emerging debate about the term postmodern, yeah, where something is sort of, something is, I mean, so it sounds like a Bob Dylan song, something is happening, but you don't quite know yet what it is, yeah, and it could go sort of either way, yeah, and there's like historical moments that lay out a whole set of possible futures, yeah, and sort of looking at it, you don't know what's going to happen, yeah, but you know it cannot continue in the way it has been happening, yeah.
So the organizers of the conference, they specifically invited these people to pursue kind of just moved to ecology, right? But they didn't predict what.
Yeah, it was sort of a little of a debate, yeah, of sort of getting away from a corporate notion of architecture and design and taking serious what was already in the air, yeah, sort of like a certain environmentalism with sort of understanding, like, I don't know, basically Earth in a different way, yeah, and that sort of course comes out of a lot of like debates from 65 to 69 and things like sort of a pivotal event was always like the first shots of the Earth as a globe, yeah, where you suddenly see, oh, this thing is actually sort of tiny and you can really wreck that in a way, yeah, and sort of, but also like within architecture, the whole sort of crusade that Buckminster Fuller was sort of pursuing, yeah, for years, yeah, sort of like traveling the country like a salesman, yeah, and sort of talking about the environment in different ways, yeah. And then sort of a certain frustration on sort of young practitioner level and student level in all these design programs, yeah.
It seems like, I mean, with all the similarities between that, like in terms of ecology becoming something to gather around and kind of question the ongoing traditions, now we have the kind of the same thing. I mean, like corporate architecture, or these kind of economy-driven architecture developers, and there being this like green movement, but very quickly being absorbed again by corporate culture. I wonder if you can speculate on why that kind of thing in the 70s led to like this collective anti-movement, and why that kind of hasn't happened now. Like why? I mean, there's a lot of things that these smaller green movements and a lot of people like questioning kind of, this technological modernism of corporate architecture, but why that hasn't really led to some kind of bigger movement within architecture, and why it's like being so easily absorbed by the dominant.
Yeah. I think like if one can speculate, it I'm sure it has a lot to do with just increasing fragmentation, yeah, and particularization of how our society functions today, yeah, sort of different understandings all the way to how we conceptualize something like power, yeah, and I think that conference is a good example for that, where you could still see in 1970 sort of a belief in, okay, group one here, group one there, and it's like an oppositional setup in a way, yeah. I think that just doesn't exist in the same way anymore, yeah? Because you do not have like one sort of corporate enemy. Yeah, you have, as you say, sort of green architecture folded into sort of the corporate matrix as such, yeah, and therefore it's much more difficult to sort of come up with a larger gesture or a larger movement, yeah, where, I mean, it's almost like sort of one would have to argue with sort of Deleuze and Guattari, yeah, it's like more these micro movements, yeah, that push for transformation of society, but the consequence then being that there's not this sort of street visibility of it, yeah, there's no, you never get the feeling that you're part of a movement, yeah, because you're just like pushing here a little, pushing there a little, and that is something that might have to do with it, yeah. But the other thing that, I mean, I'm always curious in terms of sort of looking at that myself, is to what degree did they understand themselves as a big movement, yeah, which we can see from today's perspective, yeah. It's like, to what degree did that reflect their thinking, yeah. And I have to say, I mean, I've been over the last year sort of reading a lot of commune literature from the 60s, of sort of eco-communes and stuff, yeah. And the degree of particularization, yeah, is just stunning, yeah. Of course there's like sort of large gesture utopianism, yeah, but there's also like sort of radical individualism, yeah, that sort of today we piece all that together, okay, that's the commune movement, yeah, but it was like about 40, 50 different players who, to a certain degree, knew of each other, but to a large degree also didn't.